When you think about the Twin Cities, you might picture St. Paul and Minneapolis, but the Twin Cities we are going to explore today predate that vision. They are cities of immense architectural character, with skylines composed of turrets piercing the clouds, streets lined by heavy stone mansions, and an aesthetic that will have you wondering if the Twin Cities of the past could even be the same cities they are today. Hi everyone, Ken here. Hit that subscribe button and let's uncover the lost mansions of the Twin Cities in a special episode of This House. This video is brought to you in part by Victorian Society in America. More on them later. In the early morning light that lingers along the Mississippi River, you might sense a whisper of the past clinging to the banks where St. Paul first sprang into life as a trading post. Fur traders and riverboats once clustered along the water's edge, jostling for space on the muddy shores. Back then, nobody could imagine the majestic rise of mansions that would someday grace the bluffs and avenues above. Yet rise they did, shaped by railroad barons, fur traders, and future governors who saw fit to leave their mark on Minnesota's capital city. At nearly the same moment in time, just upstream, St. Anthony Falls powered the audacious growth of Minneapolis, forging a second metropolis brimming with flour mills, lumber yards, and the ambition of countless entrepreneurs. These two places, so close on the map, hustled and bustled in distinct ways. St. Paul's gentler, old-world grandeur set against the industrial dynamo that was Minneapolis. Over time, they came to be known as the Twin Cities, though those familiar with them knew they were siblings more in name than in nature. Nevertheless, as money poured in, first from the steamboat trade, then from lumber, milling, and railroads, the wealthy sought high ground where they could display their wealth upon a pedestal. In St. Paul, Summit Avenue quickly became the address of choice for those who wanted to flaunt success. The majestic James J. Hill House still looms there, its Romanesque facade reminiscent of a medieval fortress, a rare survivor in a neighborhood where so many of its contemporaries vanished under wrecking balls decades ago. Once upon a time, near that same avenue, Norman Kitzman built a French Second Empire wonder that marked the corner of Summit and Selby with towers, mansard roofs, and all the trappings of Gilded Age taste. He passed away just 4 years after its completion, and that mansion came down to make way for the soaring Cathedral of St. Paul, a symbolic shift from private opulence to spiritual grandeur. But opulence reigned supreme in other neighborhoods as well. One could stand atop Dayton's Bluff, looking out at the downtown skyline, the river winding its way through the city, and even glimpses of neighboring Minneapolis just 10 miles distant but sometimes feeling a world away. Dayton's Bluff was never a segregated bastion of wealth like Summit Avenue. Instead, mansions rose beside simpler cottages so that bankers and bakers could be neighbors. Lyman Dayton wasn't even the first landowner there. Native people had already recognized the sacredness of that towering bluff, but when the railroads and bridges arrived in the 1880s, it turned into a melting pot of incomes and nationalities. Some of the largest houses looked out over the city below, perched at the bluff's edge, their owners able to survey St. Paul's commercial growth. Yet even the mightiest structures can prove mortal. The James E. Thompson Mansion, later taken over by Patrick H. Kelly, once dominated the bluff in Gothic Revival style, built of fieldstone in the 1860s. A traveler passing by might have admired its carved details and robust walls. Unfortunately, the freeway extension carved through that neighborhood, wiping out half the property and leaving an empty lot. Then came more heartbreak. The Ham Mansion, built by the legendary Brewers family, a Victorian sprawl that hosted countless parties, lantern-lit festivities, and even provided a refuge for tame deer and peacocks. It fell victim not to progress, but to an act of arson in 1954. The interior had been among the most decadent of all the mansions on Dayton's Bluff. From the moment you entered the mansion, you were ushered into the reception room where you were dazzled by hand stenciling framing an intricate ceiling mural. As you moved to the music room, you heard songs being played on the piano by the family's paid musician, and in the dining room, you could find a feast laid out on the table every night, prepared by the family's live-in staff. Each room boasted larger-than-life fireplaces, many of which were crafted from old growth and exotic woods. But opulence aside, homes like this would be compared to doghouses by the ultra-wealthy. Nearby, other homes, grand in their day, also disappeared. The Eichenwald Mansion fell to fires in the 1930s. The Ross Clark Mansion burned down in 1894, the John F. Eisenmenger Mansion was obliterated by flames around 1892, and the Hoyt-Nugent House met a quieter demise in the early 1920s. You might stand on the bluff now, see only grass or modern buildings, and have no inkling of the turrets, towers, and parlors that once dominated the skyline. All of this, and we haven't even seen the best neighborhoods the Twin Cities had to offer. We'll continue our tour shortly. In the meantime, a quick word about the sponsor of today's video, Victorian Society in America. Are you captivated by historic architecture? Want to explore, learn, and dive even deeper into the past? With the Victorian Society in America, you'll have the chance to travel to American cities and tour stunning 19th century buildings, pursue learning through internationally acclaimed summer programs in American cities and abroad, including Chicago, Newport, and London to name a few. Additionally, members will enjoy a free subscription to 19th Century, the semi-annual publication packed with articles on art, architecture, preservation awards, and book reviews. Visit the website below in the video description and become part of the Victorian Society in America today. Thank you, Victorian Society in America, for sponsoring today's video. Now back to our tour. In another corner of St. Paul, the Frogtown neighborhood possessed its own short-lived mansion district around University and Sherburne, not far from the capital. A grand Richardsonian Romanesque masterpiece, home to John Merriam, towered on University and Cedar, resplendent with arched balconies, pink and brown sandstone, and even a decorative winged dog perched on the roof. If that sounds fanciful, it was. Residents and passerbys alike marveled at the sheer scale of the place. His son William's house demanded equal attention, positioned on a prominent ledge which was visible to all below. The house was named Merriam's Outlook for good reason, as it could not only be seen from miles away, but offer the same views back in return. These homes were replaced in time by modern buildings, their memories all but erased by the 1960s. Old neighborhoods and lavish buildings have a habit of vanishing entirely, swallowed by the unstoppable tide of city growth. St. Paul's Central Park area, once the pinnacle of high society, featured a one-block public park donated by wealthy local families, and it was ringed by mansions of various shapes and styles. Children played in the park, some families buried loved ones in small plots behind their homes, and the city life thrummed all around. But in time, apartment houses replaced the mansions, and the entire block went under replanning for a parking ramp and an office complex. Today, a visitor driving by sees only concrete, a far cry from the gentle fountains and shade trees that once drew local families on lazy afternoons. A tiny bronze plaque is all that remains to commemorate Central Park's lost elegance. Meanwhile, Minneapolis, a hotbed of railroad barons and flower magnates, had its own enclaves for the fabulously rich. They built along Park Avenue, by the lakes, and in the leafy neighborhoods of Kenwood, Lowry Hill, and Whittier. William T. Washburn, who made his fortune in the flower business and politics, put up a veritable palace on a 10-acre parcel near what is now the Minneapolis Institute of Art. He named his estate Fair Oaks, invested in a greenhouse, an artificial pond, and a mansion that fused nearly every Victorian-era style together. It was meant to be an enduring monument to his achievements, but like so many structures of that era, it had a finite lease on life. Washburn planned to donate the land to the city, believing his estate could become an art museum or parkland. Eventually, parts of it did become a park space, but the mansion slowly fell into disuse, then into disrepair, and by 1924, it too was demolished. Today, when you stroll through Washburn Fair Oaks Park, you may find it peaceful, but have no clue it was once home to a labyrinth of rooms, passageways, and extravagant decor. Others had similarly grand plans. Charles A. Pillsbury, who turned Minneapolis into the world's flower capital with his Pillsbury Best brand, established a mansion at 2200 Stevens Avenue. Upon his passing, family lore suggests that his twin sons, John and Charles Jr., tossed a coin to decide who would keep their father's luxurious home. John won, so Charles Jr. spent his share building an equally splendid limestone abode in 1912. The second mansion garnered national attention for its refined architecture and sumptuous wood-paneled interiors. Over time, John's portion faced the wrecking ball, while Charles Jr.'s place survived into modern times. One is forced to wonder what these scions of industry might think if they returned today and saw smaller structures in place of what once seemed indestructible. But few stories illuminate the extremes of Gilded Age Minneapolis quite like the tale of Charles Gates, heir to a barbed wire empire. With his inheritance burning a hole in his pocket, he commissioned a Renaissance Revival manor near Lake of the Isles, so modern in function that it boasted a modern air conditioning system, something which was totally unheard of at the time. Its white marble facade dazzled all who saw it. Some called it the largest private house the city had ever seen. Yet Charles Gates passed away tragically at 37 years old, never living in the mansion that cost a fortune to maintain. Relatives attempted to sell it, but the city was in the throes of the Great Depression by the late 1920s, and nobody dared take on such a behemoth. Eventually, the marble colossus was demolished in 1933. Pictures from those final days show entire rooms exposed to the winter sky, and visitors salvaging columns, fireplaces, or other ornamental pieces. Then it was gone. A humble home by comparison stands there now, dwarfed by the memory of what was once imagined as a grand tribute to wealth and status. All across Minneapolis, from the magnificent to the modest, entire blocks of old mansions were reduced to rubble when highways were cut through the city. The Vincent Whitney Bayless house at 308 Ridgewood Avenue lasted until the late 1980s or so, but even it had no escape from the wave of teardown and replace that swept through the city. Samuel Gale, a stalwart who helped shape Minneapolis in its formative years, couldn't escape progress either. His first mansion was demolished soon after it was completed, as the city quickly encroached. He then built a fortress of a home at 1600 Harmon Place, only to have it vanish under the same relentless pressure of commercial developments as well. George Brackett, once mayor of Minneapolis and president of the local stockyards, lived in a house with a big wraparound porch near downtown, where the land was soon far too valuable for a single residence, another crushed by progress. Others fell to the university's expansion or gave way to multi-lane roads and modern towers for finance and technology. St. Paul has always valued reinvention, and perhaps no better symbol of that constant renewal exists than the battered skyline of old mansions and factory lofts turning into fresh developments. And yet a few gems remain, offering glimpses into how the Twin Cities might once have appeared. On Summit Avenue, you can still step into the James J. Hill House, its interior imbued with the spirit of a millionaire determined to remind the world of his standing. In Minneapolis, the Pillsbury A Mill, though not a mansion, still impresses as a redeveloped complex of apartments, reminding passerbys how the flower industry once reigned supreme along the mighty Mississippi. Time marches on, and the Twin Cities, forever dynamic, carry on that march with little regard for the grand facades that once glistened across the urban scape. Progress can be relentless, and so many of these lost mansions crumbled under the weight of property taxes, fading fortunes, or changing neighborhood boundaries. Still, their memories linger in photographs, diaries, and a few scattered architectural fragments that remain for curious souls to discover. Walk along certain streets in St. Paul or Minneapolis, and you might see a driveway leading to nowhere, a forgotten staircase, a lone ornamental gate standing near the sidewalk. Maybe you'll find a snippet of a massive stone foundation at the back of a parking lot, or a random piece of carved stone that begs the question, what once stood here? And with that question, I'll turn it over to you. Let me know your thoughts on the subject matter down below in the comments section. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to Victorian Society in America for sponsoring this video. Head over to their website and find out how you can become a member today. As always, thank you all for watching, and make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an exciting episode of This House.